Hi, this is Donita Ernest. This is my case study of Get This Child Out of My Class. This is a case study over a third grade student who has some emotional problems. The student's name is Carl, and they're from a small rural community. He has a special education teacher, Mrs. Susan Green, and a gen ed teacher, Mrs. Taylor, that are working with him. Mrs. Taylor wants him out of her classroom because he's had some sudden behaviors that she's just really struggling with. Carl's parents have recently gotten a divorce, and this seems to maybe be causing him some issues. Our cast of characters and what I know that Carl is a third grader. He has an IEP for an emotional disorder, and he has some sudden aggressive episodes. Carl has two junior high siblings, and they have emotional disorders. Carl is the youngest child, and Carl's parents have recently divorced. Mrs. Taylor, she is a respected teacher of 10 years, and she teaches third grade. She wants Carl out of her class because of some things that are going on, and she's scared of him. She's scared he's going to hurt her, the kids, or himself. And she's not very happy with Susan. We also have Susan. She's a recent graduate, probably young, working in a very rural area with limited resources, and she's trying to do what's best for Carl. She's being challenged by Mrs. Taylor, and she replaced a woman who had been in the profession for 25 years, and so she's just in some uncharted territory for herself. We also have Mr. and Mrs. Hughes. They just went through a bitter divorce a few months ago. They have three children, and each of them has a mental health issue. And at least one of them is on Ritalin. Mom is frustrated and angry with dad, and mom has recently had to take a job because that happens when people get divorced. Money problems intensify, and she's had to take on a job that takes her away from home a lot. Dad isn't very involved, and mom suggests using the siblings' meds for Carl. So, what do I need to know? Well, I need to know what Carl's behavior looked like prior to mom and dad's divorcing. Is there anyone else besides Mrs. Taylor having a problem with Carl's behaviors? The school bus driver, the librarian, the PE teacher, the music teacher, the school secretaries, anything like that. What do the relationships look like there? Or is it just with Mrs. Taylor? What's happening right before Carl has an aggressive episode? Is he coming in off the playground? Is he coming in off the school bus, coming back from unstructured time like the lunchroom or maybe PE? Or is it right in the middle of class? Is it at noon every day, at 1 o'clock, at 8 o'clock? What are we looking at here? And number 4, does Carl receive any type of counseling services or visit the school counselor? This could be mental health counseling in the community, or it could be with his counselor at school. Number 5, why is Mrs. Taylor so insistent on getting Carl out of her class? We've only been in school 6 weeks. That's not a very long time to work, on getting a kid's behavior in line. But why is this sudden wanting him to get out? Number 6, has Carl had previous behaviors in prior grades, pre-K, first, second? Were his teachers male, female? What did that look like? And number 7, does Carl have friends and positive adult relationships in the building? So, what's the problem? Well, Mrs. Taylor is scared of Carl, and this is causing some issues. Carl is having sudden outbursts, and Mrs. Taylor doesn't feel supported by Susan. That's pretty much it in a nutshell. Mrs. Taylor has been demanding and comparing of Susan to the prior SPED teacher, and Mr. and Mrs. Hughes are not helping the situation. Mom's hurt, dad's hurt, and I think they're just learning how to navigate this new way of life for them. Susan wants to do what's best for Carl, but she isn't sure what that is. So, category 2, plan of action. Contact first the cooperative and get an appointment with the school psych so they can come in, make an observation, interview the student, interview the teacher, and try to figure out what is going on. Maybe we do need to make some changes to the IEP. I personally would visit Mrs. Taylor's room, and not just once, or not just once in the morning or once in the afternoon, but I would definitely go in different times of the day and find out what's this look like inside her classroom. I would contact the school counselor and have them visit with Carl and put him on a schedule to form a relationship with him. I would like to talk to Mrs. Taylor and provide training in CPI, a crisis training program to educate her on ways to protect Carl, herself, and her students during an outburst. So, continuing with the plan of action, I would like to have a meeting with Mrs. Taylor to see what's going on. Why is she so insistent on getting Carl out, and maybe this conflict between her and Mrs. Green? I would have a meeting with Susan or Mrs. Green to see what she thinks is going on. And then like to come together with the three of us to discuss ways to help Carl and to form a workable relationship between the two educators. I would like to contact mom and dad to provide them with community resources to help the family during this difficult time, and also get Carl plugged into a lunch bunch, after school activity, or a club to help him form some relationships. And then make sure I, as a building leader, make contact with Carl as many times a week as is possible so he can have another positive relationship in the building. Continuing with my plan, I would like to teach both Carl and Mrs. Taylor how to implement 4-7-8 breathing patterns and techniques. This will help both of them and the whole class in general if we use it. I would like to teach Carl how to monitor his behaviors and how to self-regulate, and give him an area for cool down when he feels himself becoming aggressive. I'd like to give Mrs. Taylor some resources such as You Can Handle Them All and other interventions that she can implement in the room with all students, not just Carl. She can work on everyone at the same time, including herself, and then provide Mrs. Taylor with an aid so she could feel like she's being supported until the IEP gets looked at and the school psych makes their personal recommendations. Category 3, promoting success for all students. Right now we're looking at Carl, but any of this information can be done and used for all students. So classroom guidance lessons given by the counselor on anger, divorce, change. These are for everyone, not just for Carl. Lots of students go through these things. And although the goals and objectives can't be changed in an IEP without a meeting, other interventions can be done. We can teach breathing. We can provide areas for cool down. We can teach children to journal and do a side-by-side chat with them to help them regulate their emotions. Category 3 continued, promoting success for all students. ACEs, I would offer training on that. Adverse childhood experiences, and Carl has one that we know of. He has parents that are divorced, and so giving them support, giving them ACEs training will support not just Carl in his education, but every student. To become trauma informed and educate all staff to teach de-escalation techniques. And again, this is not just for Carl, this is for all students. And then to offer CPI training to help teachers protect themselves, students, and others. So, category 4, let's reflect on the problem. What was I thinking? I completely understand what Susan is going through. Teachers can be very demanding, and a lot of times they do not understand the IEP process. So that's a little bit frustrating. I completely understand Mrs. Taylor's perspective. She has a classroom with students that all have needs, and Carl's needs are overwhelming to her. And I think that Susan is in for a very difficult first year because she's being compared to someone who's been in that job for 25 years. So we're going to continue on with what was I feeling? Sad. I feel sad for Carl. His parents have divorced. That's a hard thing. That's a tough, terrible thing. He's struggling at school. His teacher and him don't get along. And so I'm kind of sad for him. And I feel bad for Susan. She's got some big shoes to fill. She wants to help Carl, but doesn't quite have the resources that she may need. And dealing with Mrs. Taylor, it's never fun when people are mad or angry at you. And so this is kind of difficult. And then I feel pain for the parents. Mom's frustration and fear, dad's inability to know what to do, and how this is going to all play out. And continuing on category 4, what did I value? I valued Susan trying to come up with a solution. She has her work cut out for her, but she went right to work trying to come up with a plan. And she really thinks that Mrs. Taylor and her could work together. She seems to be positive and optimistic. That's things to be valued. I value Mr. and Mrs. Hughes coming to the meeting, and even Mrs. Hughes expressing herself. That shows us a lot and explains a lot of things. What I did not value was Mrs. Taylor taking the initiative first. This should have been Susan's place, the school psychs, or the principal's spot, but not Mrs. Taylor. So, moving on to category 5 and promoting that academic success and well being. How would I promote this? Well, I would bring professional development to my building, maybe Kagan specifically, and along with that, some win win discipline, which falls under Kagan. And this just helps teachers to learn ways to engage and keep kids learning at some very engaging levels. I would also consider having my cooperative team come in and work with teachers on interventions, accommodations, and things that they can use in their classroom. And I would also like to create an SEL group or groups that focus on emotional needs, learning needs, and social needs. Social emotional learning is so important, especially to kids in these lower grades that are struggling with social issues and emotional issues. And we know this is Carl. We need to get some of those started. Continuing with the academic well-being, I would like to implement classroom guidance to help with instructional strategy to look at the social emotional wellness of students. I would also like to look at implementing a kindness club or giving community service, giving back in ways that help the students to think of others and build relationships. I would also like to utilize my social workers or trained teachers to go to the parents out in the community, whether that be contacting them by email, phone, text, or actually going to the home, but to build that relationship with the parents and form good working conditions. And also teach mindfulness, relaxation, brain breaks, and teach teachers how to foster positive relationships with their students and with each other. How would I enhance instructional capacity? Well, increase the amount and the type of professional development to look at the whole child and the whole teacher. Let's focus a little bit more on that social emotional part right now and back off the academic just a little bit. And let's look and see if we can look at this from a different perspective. I would like to work with teachers on depth of knowledge on their lessons that they are working on, working with Bloom's taxonomy, looking at rigor, relevance, and their relationship, and just encouraging them to become stronger in those areas. Make sure that the children are being challenged, but not excessively to where they feel they can't achieve. And then professional development, just looking at the importance of relationships, looking at the instructional development, and working at collaborating with teachers. So, in conclusion, one of the things that I believe are to my advantage is being a school counselor. And as I look at this case study through the eyes of a principal, I can't help but do it as well as a counselor through the eyes of a counselor. With this in mind, tending to the whole student is so essential. And students' behavior is purposive. Most of the time, if we study the student and what's going on in and around and through the child, we will gain a lot of insight. This is the approach that I would take as well with this case study. As I like to remind my teachers, they are all our students. All, it's an inclusive word. They are all ours. And thank you for listening. And I think this is the 6th or 7th time I've recorded this. So I hope I didn't go too fast, but I hope that it takes this time. Thank you for listening.